Like I promised, I'm going to be throwing in some 40k lore along with the Gundam stuff I'm doing, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. Specifically, one of the really fun gimmicky ones. See, when it comes to Space Marine chapters, I tend to mentally sort them into the ones that feel more like a bread sandwich. Think the Imperial Fists or Ultramarines, which are good chapters, by the way. They're just not as crazy. And then you have the ones that feel like there's something a bit more extreme to them. Those particular chapters tend to wear their gimmick loud and proud. For example, the Salamanders actually kill giant fire-resistant, salamanders on their home planet of Nocturne to gain entry into the chapter. Think of just like killing big dragons, but without wings. Their armor will have scales and fire all over it, alongside things like a blacksmith's tongs to signify their chapter's culture. They also engage in ritual branding during burial ceremonies, stuff like that. Then you have chapters like the Dark Angels, taking a lot from Arthurian Knights. And then you have the Black Templars, who pull from the Knights Templar. And then we have today's subject, the Carcharodons Astra. Now, the Carcharodons, to me, might be one of the most misunderstood chapters within the entirety of the Space Marines, because there's a lot of claims made about them that aren't really true. I'll get to that in a bit, but what attracted me to these guys was honestly their aesthetics. In a time where you see a lot of Space Marines with pristine Mark X armor, these guys are wearing Heresy-era stuff alongside a ton of things with bonding studs attached. On top of that, they have a love of chain weaponry, which is Warhammer 40k as it gets. They're big, they're intimidating, and I love them. So, who are the Carcharodons? Let's talk about it.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
The Carcharodons Astra are a fleet-based chapter of Space Marines that are probably one of the most mysterious out there. No one knows 100% when they were founded, no one knows exactly where they strike from, and they are a chapter completely and totally devoted to silence. They don't even have a war cry, which not all Space Marine chapters do, but for them it fits with their theme. The mysteries that surround them are a big part of their charm, so the rumor and innuendo that come from discussing them, here on the internet at least, is sort of par for the course. Here's what we do know for certain. Whenever they show up to a planet, they will call out to whatever Imperial forces are there with an old code. Think Heresy-era code, which at the current point of Warhammer 40k would be over 10,000 years old. It's clear that they're Imperial forces, but you'd be confused on why their stuff hasn't been updated. From there, they will transmit a request in High Gothic, which is effectively Latin. Just for future reference, anytime I do a 40k video, if you hear me say something is High Gothic, it's basically Latin, Low Gothic is English. Regardless, the transmission will be a quiet, calm voice that simply and respectfully asks if they can aid the forces in the area. If you respond and say you're happy to have their assistance or something to that effect, they will do exactly that and come to aid you. From there, you might see two Marines come and greet you. One will be a Space Marine that carries a two-handed chain axe, and the other will be a Space Marine wearing a Librarian's armor, which will, instead of being colored gray, will be colored blue, but both of them will have black pauldrons with sharks on them. They will speak to you in High Gothic, but can speak low if you don't understand them. From there, they will ask you what's happening, tell you exactly what they're going to do, who they are going to kill, and they will let you know what they need from you. From there, they go to work. Now, the fearsome part about this is that you have 8-foot-tall men in powered armor speaking to you in soft, polite voices in a language that you might not completely understand. Thing is, when they take off their helmets, what you're going to see is very frightening. A member of the Carcharodons will have pale skin, eyes that are almost completely black, and they'll have ritually filed down their teeth into points like a shark's tooth. So yes, they're very on the nose with their gimmick, which I like. What I appreciate about them is that they have a very distinctive culture to them. Now when you look at them, you'll notice the tattooing and the designs on their armor, which are called exile marks. These are obviously an homage to Polynesian cultures, specifically the Maori and the Samoans. So yeah, if you're looking at a Carcharodon, see his tattoos and think of someone like, let's say, professional wrestler Roman Reigns' tattooing. You're not far off. That's where it's inspired from. Speaking of the Samoans and the Maori, could you imagine a bunch of Carcharodons doing a haka? That would be fucking terrifying. Thing is, you're not going to see that because these guys aren't big fans of in-your-face actions. You see, The Carcharodons are actually stealth and hit-and-run experts. They actually hunt like sharks do. Again, it's on the nose, but in a fun way. What they tend to do is, if they have to assault a big target, they will strike at it just to see how the enemy responds. From there, they look for a weak point, pull back, and then later strike the weak point. It's a parallel to how a shark hunts in nature. After that strike is successful, expect to hear a lot of chain swords, a lot of screaming, a lot of splashes of gore everywhere, and then nothing. When they leave an engagement, you won't find any evidence of them. You might find a gory mess of their enemies, but you won't find the body of a Carcharodon or any equipment that they might find useful. The reason for this is that the Carcharodons are exiles, though we don't know all the details as to why. We just have hints, which I'll talk about when I dissect some of the more mysterious elements of these guys. What we do know is that when the gene seed of the Carcharodons was tested during an event called the Bad Ab War, which was a war in the Imperium between Loyalist Space Marines that was basically over taxes. I'll do my own video on it at some point. Their gene seed came up as pinging most of the genetic markers of the Raven Guard, who I also want to do a video on at some point because they're one of my favorite chapters. Though it wasn't a 100% thing. They were also exiled by someone called the Forgotten One, who they call their father, likely their Primarch. As for their organization, they're roughly Codex compliant, though they're rarely at full strength to where it's going to matter. Instead of your traditional rank structure, it's the same roles, but different naming convention. And they're not the only chapter that does this. Then again, one of the cool things about Space Marines is that almost every chapter has a different culture than the other one, so you'll see this from chapter to chapter sometimes. Anyway, the chapter master of the Carcharodons is called the Shade Lord, a title previously used by Raven Guard Commander Arcus Fall during the Great Crusade. Their captains are called Company Masters, and each Company Master will have a role in the chapter, like the Reaper Prime and the Harvester Prime. More on them later. Strike Leaders are your Sergeants, and Battle Brothers are called Void Brothers. They have First Company Terminators known as the Red Brethren, and their Assault Marines are called Devourers. We don't know what they call their lieutenants, though, oddly enough. Or at least I couldn't find out what they call them. As for their chapter master, this is Tiberos, the Red Wake. He is canonically the largest chapter master in the setting, which is saying something because there's some really big ones. But he is said to stand a whole head above someone in Terminator armor. However, it is possible that outside his armor he's a little shorter, but still. He's a massive dude, given that he wears custom Terminator armor like most Space Marines wear normal armor, and given the scale of his model, it's estimated that he is about, let's say, 9, maybe 9.5 feet tall, whereas your average Space Marine is about 7.5 to 8 if they've gone through the Rubicon Primaris. That doesn't quite make him as tall as a Primarch, but if he were to stand in front of Primarch Rebute Gilliman, for example, Gilliman wouldn't have to look that far down to actually look eye to eye to him. He actually wears custom Terminator armor that some people say is reinforced by Dreadnought plate. This, I think, though, is a misreading. You see, Terminator armor isn't actually called Terminator armor in the setting, or if it is, it's very rare. It's usually called Tactical Dreadnought armor. Terminator is the role of the person who uses it. So I think that's probably where the rumor started. His armor is custom Terminator armor, though, and what's scary about this guy is he's stealthy! Yeah. The description of how he shows up sometimes in the fiction is sort of like Jason Voorhees. You just turn the corner and suddenly he's there. He also wears a pair of lightning claws with chainsaw blades on the underside of the palm called Hunger and Slake. No wonder you don't hear about him shaking hands. The other thing we know about the Carcharodons is their tithes. They have two, the red tithe and the gray tithe. For the red tithe, this is a tithe of flesh. The Reaper Prime of the chapter, captain of the 3rd Company, who is currently an absolute badass named Baal Shar, will go to an Imperial planet to conscript new chapter serfs and laborers, on top of new Space Marine recruits. Oftentimes this is usually done on a planet that they have aided in some manner. Now, one thing to mention, whenever the Carcharodons go down and they take their tithe, which, to be honest, a lot of Space Marine chapters are allowed to do, they will get volunteers. So not everybody is being enslaved or being voluntold that they work for the Carcharodons now, though sometimes they are. One of these takes place in the book, Red Tithe, where they went down to a penal colony to conscript new dudes and save a young psyker to bring him into the fold as a new librarian. Oh, and they beat the shit out of the Night Lords, who also wanted the same psyker, who they did manage to save. It was a fun fight, but then again, it's the Night Lords, it's not much in the way of competition. Another way for them to get recruits, however, is done through trade negotiations with a renegade chapter of former Raven Guard who call themselves the Ashen Claws, who have a brotherhood of sorts with the Carcharodons. Basically, these guys left the Imperial military, but will still go fight stuff in their own corner of space. Granted, negotiations oftentimes aren't easy to deal with, considering the head of the Ashen Claws isn't too fond of Tyberos. He claims that the Carcharodons stole Tyberos' weapons from the Ashen Claws, in which case, I think to myself, okay, well, here's the thing. Are you stupid enough to try and take them back from him? As for the other tithe, you have the Grey Tithe. The Carcharodons' Harvester Prime is the captain of the 4th Company, and he has the job of making sure the Carcharodons have plenty of arms and equipment. They have to seek out ancient archaeotech in the lost worlds of what's called the Outer Dark, basically the parts of the galaxy nobody goes to anymore. When they get this stuff, they trade it to the Adeptus Mechanicus, or to the Ashen Claws. The reason for these tithes is that their father, when he exiled them, told them they cannot operate as a normal chapter in the Emperor's Light, who they call the Void Father. But rather, they can only acquire men and equipment through the tithes, and they have to do it in secret. So instead of getting regular recruits and equipment from the Imperium, they're basically exiled to fetch quests until their dad says they're not grounded anymore. Now they have 4 or so books, but the only ones that I've read are Outer Dark, Red Tithe, and Void Exile, which just came out. I can't speak to Silent Hunters. All I know about it is that it's about the Carcharodons' chaplain Tunganta Manu, and his quest to recover an artifact given to them by the Forgotten One. Apparently, in part of the book, they figure out how to break a Drukhari mentally, which is a very, very tough thing to do, and they do it through sense deprivation, which is pretty clever. In the current day, apparently they have had a company involved in Robute Gilman's Indominus Crusade, and they also have access to the Rubicon Primaris procedure to upgrade their Space Marines to Primaris Marines, though they didn't take the reinforcements that Belisarius Cawl was giving out because they're not allowed to do so as part of their exile. From here on in, we need to talk about the mysterious stuff when it comes to the Carcharodons. Things we don't know for sure, but we can come to the conclusion if we connect the dots. So, let's dive into it, shall we? Get it? Sharks. Dive in. Sorry, I'll start the next section. So what's the truth? They're Raven Guard successors. Yeah, that's basically the long and short of it. I'll discuss some theory here in a bit, but the fact is they are Raven Guard successors. So let's go ahead and break it down how I figured this out piece by piece. First, the Forgotten One is described in Red Tithe, and the description of him is basically Corvus Corax, the Primarch of the Raven Guard. They look like Raven Guard as well, down to the pale skin and the black eyes. The difference in their looks comes from the armor colors and their hairstyles, which is a chapter choice. Obviously with the Raven Guard, they wear black armor, and the Carcharodons wear gray armor with black pauldrons. The Carcharodons take their style from Polynesian cultures, and the Raven Guard take theirs from Peter Steele or Nathan Explosion. Their combat tactics and use of stealth are incredibly similar. The main difference is that the Carcharodons don't use many snipers or jump packs, but both chapters adore using hit-and-run tactics on top of stealth and subterfuge. Both are known for being whisper quiet, which doesn't make sense for men that are 8 feet tall, but, you know. The second bit that points to this is that Tyberos the Red Wake has the title of Shade Lord. At that point, we go back to Arcus Fall. Arcus Fall was a Terran-born Raven Guard, and before the Raven Guard were introduced to their Primarch, Corvus Corax, they were not nice guys. The War Master, Horus Lupercal, the Great Traitor, basically used the Raven Guard for all sorts of nefarious stuff, and they had a reputation for being pricks. Now, when the Primarchs were thrown to the winds by chaos at their birth, Corvus Corax made his name by growing up a slave, but later destroyed a bunch of slavers on the planet of Lycaeus, which he later named to Deliverance. He was also one of the last found, so the Raven Guard had been operating for a while before they ever met him. So when he met his sons, he found a bunch of dudes from Earth that were pricks. You can see why he wouldn't be pleased with his sons when he met them if they remind him of the very people whose asses he just kicked. At this point, Corvus assigned many of the Terran-born Raven Guard to tough missions, and mostly relied on the men he recruited from his homeworld of Deliverance for the main stuff. In the book The Horus Heresy Book 3, Extermination, Fall was sent into the Void with a nomad predation fleet, mostly comprised of Terran-born Raven Guard, and we don't hear from him again. One thing to mention is that the Carcharodons' fleet is called the Nomad Predation Fleet. There's a rumor in the 8th edition Raven Guard Codex supplement that some of those men who went into the Outer Dark during the Great Crusade might have ended up joining Horus, but there's been no confirmation of it. So I have a theory to fill in the blanks here. I have a feeling that after the heresy, that Arcus Fall, or maybe one of his successors, went to Corvus Corax and wanted redemption for the things that the Shade Lord had done during the Great Crusade. In fact, I think that they were part of what would end up becoming the Ashen Claws, who, as I mentioned, were going renegade. Plus, Corvus was already pissed off about everything that had happened when he lost 2 of his brothers and his father the Emperor during the heresy. So I think what happened is he took the ones that wanted redemption and dubbed them the Carcharodons, since this is around the time that all the Loyalist legions were getting split up into chapters. At that point, I think is when he gave them their new rules. If they redeem themselves through diligent service, he will welcome them back into his good graces. It's even said in the books that their father is the only one who can call them redeemed. At that point, they can recruit and get reinforcements and equipment through normal channels instead of having to use the tithes they use now and scrounge around for a living. The other clue that they're a Raven Guard successor is they also suffer from something called the Sable Brand and another thing called the Primarch's Curse. Now, during the early stages of the Primarch's Curse, a Raven Guard, or a successor, will become more withdrawn, silent, and moody, preferring to operate in small teams. For the Carcharodons, it's very similar but has a small difference, because instead of working in small teams, they prefer just to operate alone. This tends to happen the older they get. In fact, Tyberos is clearly suffering from this when we see him in the book Outer Dark. You will never see him with a group of people. He always is going alone. Now, both the Raven Guard and the Carcharodons suffer from something called the Sable Brand, or becoming ash blind, where their eyes will become completely black, and the Astartes tend to go into a suicidal and homicidal fury, though this can be overcome given time. The interesting thing about the Carcharodons is they have learned how to control it, and have a more efficient way of moving past it. You see, Carcharodons spend a lot of time in silence and in meditation. Much of their chapter doctrine and culture is based around control of one's emotions as well. In a sense, they're a lot like space monks. They understand the necessity of focus, and they frown upon a loss of control. Granted, they do have a bit of a temper on occasion, which is why so many people seem to think that the Carcharodons might have a hybridized gene seed, which I actually do agree with. I think that they're mostly Raven Guard. However, I think at some point the gene seed got tampered with and was hybridized with that of the World Eaters. Granted, I think the only thing that makes it similar is that Carcharodons seem to get to the Sable Brand faster than normal Raven Guard do. But a lot of people seem to think that it's just because they go berserk on occasion and they have a love of chain weaponry. But even then, most of the chapter still happily uses bladed power weapons, shields, and combat knives. Plus, there's more than one chapter that struggles with temper issues. Obviously, I mentioned the Sable Brand with the Raven Guard causing them to go berserk. But the Ultramarines are also known for their members having ridiculously bad tempers, like their father Gilliman does. Do not piss off the taxman, folks. The love of chain weapons is very World Eaters in style, but then again, most chapters love and use chain weaponry, so it might be a bit of a red herring. However, the desire for a more solitary nature, I think that might come from Angron's genes, given his temperament before he was even given the Butcher's nails. One thing I'm absolutely sure about is that these guys are not Night Lord's successors. Night Lord's fans, Jesus, you need to stop trying to claim these guys as yours. They're not. The Night Lords aren't that cool. On top of that, these guys don't act like Night Lords either, so I don't know where this "they're loyalist Night Lords" thing comes from. I'm gonna blame Bricky and his giant forehead, just because I can. No, the Night Lords do not have a monopoly on being sneaky and scary, and the Night Lords don't approach stealth the same way the Carcharodons do. The Night Lords like theatrics. They do psychological warfare and toy with their prey. They're divas on Broadway. They like attention. If they could do every mission to the tune of Phantom of the Opera or a song by My Chemical Romance, they'd do it. The Carcharodons don't. The Carcharodons are like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers in how they approach stealth. The way they were described in the Bad Ab War was that their main opponents, the Mantis Warriors, would set up positions for sniping and such. Once they were set up, you'd look up and suddenly there's a Carcharodon there. And you'd have no fucking clue how they got there or when they got there. Was he there the whole time? Or did he sneak up there when they weren't looking? How did they not hear them? It gave them a reputation of being like ghosts on the battlefield. This is a familiar tactic, used by the Raven Guard. Corvus Corax would do this all the time, and both chapters modify their armor the same way to be quieter. They both even will manipulate the power levels on their power packs to reduce the noise that is made by the armor, and reduce their heat signature. The other things people point to is the Night Lords calling the Carcharodons brothers, and the Carcharodons drinking blood at a point in the book Red Tithe. The context is needed here. First, the Night Lords call a lot of other Astartes brothers, and oftentimes in a mocking tone. This isn't just something that they do either. A lot of Chaos Space Marines do it. Imura, the Thousand Suns sorcerer from Space Marine 2, does the same thing. It's just a way to mock an Astartes via association. The only Raven Guard successors to snag Night Lord's gene seed that we know of were indeed the Ashen Claws, but there's no mention of the Carcharodons ever having it. And we don't even know if the Ashen Claws even used it. They may have grabbed it so that the Night Lords couldn't make more cringe emo bat people. Second thing is the drinking of blood. Screwed up as it is, this isn't abnormal for any Astartes, and Lord knows the Night Lords don't have a monopoly on that either, not with the Blood Angels in the room. No, what the Carcharodons will do to gather intel is make good use of the omophagia, which is an organ that many Astartes chapters have that allow them to gather memories by ingesting the blood of an enemy. In Red Tithe, they use this to get a position on Night Lord's forces, who they then go and kick the crap out of, because it's an easy fight. So is the scene creepy? Yeah, it scares the crap out of an Arbites that the Carcharodons were guarding, but their chief librarian, Tekaharangi, assured her that she's safe, which she was. Scared out of her mind, but safe. The final note, though, on these guys being Night Lord successors actually comes from Conrad Kurz himself. The last words he says to Talos Valkorion in the book Soul Hunter is, "Do you think I care about what happens to any of you after I die?" He hated his sons. With that in mind, why the hell would Conrad Kurz go out of his way to create a successor chapter, give them a name, and then send them into the Outer Dark to serve the Emperor? Why the heck would he do something that Gilliman would want him to do? I'm sorry, but when I hear this theory, it tells me two things. First is that Night Lords fans, for some reason, feel the need to insert these cringe emo bat people into everything. And second is that they don't really know anything about the Carcharodons. Here's the thing, though, and this might get me in trouble with Chaos fans, but Chaos is cringe, so I don't care. Robbie McNiven's Carcharodons books are just as good as the Night Lords trilogy. And honestly, there's no excuse for not reading them. They're awesome. Now, for some fun facts. So the Carcharodons have the biggest chapter master, right? We've already established that. Well, another accolade that they have is that they also have the second and third oldest living Astartes as well, if you don't count the thawed-out Primaris Marines. Yeah, both the chief librarian, Tekaharangi, and one of their chaplains, Tangatamanu, who is Tekaharangi's younger brother, are both over 1,400 years old. which would make them about 100 years younger than the oldest living Astartes, Dante, who is the chapter master of the Blood Angels. Also, I'd argue that Te Carcharodons has the dopest nickname of the chapter in the Pale Nomad. Another thing that's on the nose, but fun, honestly sounds like something out of Naruto. One thing that Te Carcharodons likes to do with his psychic abilities is create a shark's maw out of the earth and have it eat someone. Kind of hokey, and honestly feels very anime, but it's fun. It's a lot cooler than just a fireball. Oddly enough, funny thing about the Librarius in regards to the Carcharodons is the way that their psychic abilities manifest and the color that they are. You see, you know that psyker I mentioned earlier from Red Tithe? Well, not only did he become a space marine, but he crossed the Rubicon Primaris as well. His name is Cowrie, and he's a badass in his own right. But the two of them have different colored psychic fire. Te Carcharodons is blue, Cowrie's is green. Now, here's a real question. What does the future hold for our Shark Boys, now that we've got all that mystery out of the way?
I can see the future! Oh no, they can see me!
It's hard to say what's going to happen with the Carcharodons in the future. It's time to spoil the new book, Void Exile. Close your ears if you don't want to hear it. I've already told you it's good. Go read it. The Carcharodons are teamed up with the Adeptus Mechanicus to fight agents of Vashtor the Arcaphane in a book that I can best describe as being, what if you put the game Space Marine 2 in a blender with Tetsuo the Iron Man? But yeah, most of the chapter crossed the Rubicon Primaris. In fact, of the characters that we follow in the third company of the Carcharodons in this book, only one of the firstborn Marines are still a firstborn Marine. On top of that, the book also mentions that since the fall of Cadia, the Carcharodons often find themselves working with other elements of the Imperium a lot more, including other Space Marine chapters. As for Baal Shar, the character arc he goes through is very similar to what Titus did in Space Marine 1-2, though instead of the Death Watch, Baal Shar was exiled from the chapter. So at this point, I honestly want Robbie McNiven to write a book that has the Carcharodons meet the Raven Guard just to see what happens, or I'd also like to see them show up in the third Space Marine game, again, just to see what happens, considering there's a lot of parallels between Lieutenant Titus and Baal Shar. Then you can have them go beat up more Night Lords, get an easy win. I do think the next big thing with this chapter is going to happen whenever the rest of the Primarchs come back. Games Workshop has thrown little hints here and there about more Primarchs returning, such as Leman Russ or Vulcan. At some point, they're going to bring back Corvus Corax. Oh, quick debunking of something else. I'll go into more detail when I do a Raven Guard video, but Corvus being a big bird demon isn't really what the books described. More along the lines that he was a shape-shifting living shadow, which I think is more frightening. You see, each Primarch has ties to the warp, and has special abilities. Corvus's has gone from being able to effectively remove himself from your perception to just flat out turning into a living shadow, where he's apparently gone full Dracula at one point and turned into a flock of ravens as opposed to bats. Either way, just about every Primarch stated that they would return at some point or another, basically to help prevent the end of everything. Given that the galaxy got split in half, this is the right time for it to happen. Now, given that they'll probably go in order of popularity, we'll probably get Leman Russ first, then either Vulcan or Rogel Dorn if they decide that Dorn is still alive, then the other one, then Jagatai Khan, then Corvus. Much as it pains me, the Raven Guard aren't that popular, which is part of the reason why I think many lore tubers tend to just run over the basics with them, instead of going into details on why these guys are so cool. Well, I love them, and obviously you can tell that I adore their two great successors in the Raptors and the Carcharodons. Either way, the Carcharodons will be stuck with the Tithes and the Exile until Corvus comes back and decides whether or not they've redeemed themselves. Whenever that happens, it'll be pretty cool. But until then, these guys are stuck in the Outer Dark, striking where the opportunity arises. If you enjoy lore videos like this, do not forget to like and subscribe, because I mostly cover Mobile Suit Gundam, but I'm going to start working in more 40k stuff as we go along as well. If you enjoyed also, please consider becoming a member and supporting the channel. Every little bit helps. Once we actually hit the 70 member mark, which we're getting closer to each time I do a video, my editor, Shirt Dude, and I are actually going to start a lore-based podcast to discuss things like this in more depth and cover more subjects. Not to mention, members will actually get 6 months of exclusivity for the podcast when we start it. So, something to consider. Regardless, folks, appreciate everybody sitting and listening for the time that I've had with you. My name is Big Micah C, your favorite vanilla gorilla. I will see you guys on the next one. Have a great day.